Thank you, Will, for the introduction, and many thanks to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of you and the great panel that we have here today. I'd just like to start by acknowledging my collaborators on this research project, David Marlowe from Third Life Economics and Doctors Sabina Dietrich and Michael Glass at the University of Pittsburgh. So the program of work I'm going to speak about is looking at how we can improve the inclusion outcomes from big investments in innovation infrastructure in post-industrial cities. So this is the beginning of what I hope will be a multi-year piece of work. Our next case studies will be looking at post-conflict economies. So we've been to Medellin in Colombia, and our next case will be Belfast. Anyway, I just wanted to say where all this began for me. Those of you who are familiar with Newcastle and this new innovation district known now as the Helix will recognize this. And I was heading up for a meeting in this building on the left-hand side, which is the Catalyst, home to the National Innovation Centres of Data, Ageing and Rural Enterprise, as well as a number of innovative businesses built at a cost of 50 million and a real flagship part of the Helix development. And then on the right-hand side, we have the People's Kitchen, which was founded in 1984 to support homeless and vulnerable people and help fight hunger and loneliness for locals in need. And it's sustained, as I'm sure many of you know, by the efforts of volunteers and charitable donations. And the question that really struck me as I was taking this picture is, how does what happens in that building on the left help or impact on the lives of people going into that building on the right? So just a little bit of context. There's a lot of attention being given to the role of innovation-led investments, particularly in places like Newcastle and Pittsburgh that are struggling to recover from decades of deindustrialization. However, many of these investments in infrastructure, especially in post-industrial cities, have not delivered the positive outcomes for local communities and businesses. The model for these innovation districts has, for the most part, focused on and been driven by a technology push approach, with the emphasis on research arising from the science, technology, engineering, and maths disciplines, what we call STEM subjects, at the neglect of the humanities, the social sciences, and the arts, which I'll come back to briefly at the end. So just one graph to illustrate where we haven't really seen the positive impacts. I will, kind of put a health warning. We're talking about quite small percentages and numbers here, but I think it just illustrates that if we look at on the left-hand side, around the time the first building went up on the Helix, there was quite a gap already between the percentage of people employed in scientific research and technical activities in the region, in the city, as well as the district of Newcastle Central, where the Helix is located. And over the years following that original building going up, that gap actually only further widened. So in regions like ours, with some of the most acute economic and social challenges, how can we ensure that these investments don't entrench and further widen these disparities? So I'm going to be talking about the research that we've done in these two cities, which explored how two recent major investments in innovation could be delivered in a more inclusive way, and to offer some guidance for universities, policymakers, and practitioners for the design of future industrial districts to include the social sciences and the humanities in a drive for greater inclusion. So our starting point really with the work is what can we do differently? So we don't just want to tell the terrible stories and point out all the problems, but we really really wanted to find ways that we can do these things better in future. So just quickly to say something about Newcastle and Pittsburgh, because they're two cities with some really striking similarities. They have quite similar populations of around 300,000 in the city and around 2 million in the wider metropolitan area. In terms of economic and social indicators, unfortunately, quite a lot of commonality there as well. So household incomes significantly below the national average, 75% in Newcastle and 72% in Pittsburgh. And Will has already given us some overview of some of the issues that we face here. poverty rates significantly higher than national average. Both areas were dominated by heavy industry, so coal mining and shipbuilding in the case of Newcastle, and steel production and related manufacturing in the case of Pittsburgh, from the 18th century right through to the 60s and 70s, and after which then some rapid economic decline. This also led to population decline until the end of the 20th century, and in Pittsburgh's case, this was much more acute than in Newcastle. The population almost halved during this period. So both cities now have a focus on designing some industrial strategies around digital, healthcare, life sciences, education, and manufacturing, advanced manufacturing in their reinvention post their industrial decline. And there's two new innovation districts, the Helix in Newcastle and Hazelwood Green in Pittsburgh, are key elements in realizing these ambitions. They also have two major universities with similar student population sizes, so Northumbria and Newcastle in the case of Newcastle here, and Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, along with a number of other small private institutions. So just to give you some idea of the two innovation districts, because while the two cities have a lot of similarities, there's a number of differences in the innovation districts. Both are adjacent to neighbourhoods, so the West End in Newcastle and Hazelwood in Pittsburgh, that have strong and vibrant community sectors. However, both places suffer from many of the characteristics of declining and so-called left-behind communities in terms of income, employment levels, health and education inequalities, quality and choice of housing, transport and connectivity challenges. And Hazelwood has also experienced significant depopulation in recent decades, with 2/3 fewer residents than at its peak. Both places and their role players are highly attuned to the risks that their investments in innovation could lead to increased disparities and displacement for local citizens, without an explicit focus on how these can be designed and delivered in more inclusive ways. So we really did find in both places a real desire for these to really contribute to a more inclusion-rich outcome. But even with this sensitivity to inclusion, both developments have still faced challenges and opposition from local communities. So here's the Helix, 24 acres in the city centre, but we've had coverage in the local press that really questions what this means for the city and for local residents. And I was really struck by the quote from a local resident in this newspaper article, where they said, "It was better when it used to be the brewery. I worked there, my family worked there. At least that felt like it was for local people." Likewise, in Pittsburgh, local residents have questioned what Hazelwood Green offers them. The early days of the development saw clashes around pedestrian access to other places that were being closed off, and most notably, organised opposition to the proposal for an autonomous transport service to link Hazelwood Green to the University Quarter in Oakland, when what the community actually wanted was a bus that could take them to the nearest supermarket, which is about 1.5 miles away in the other direction, Hazelwood being essentially a food desert. So the plan was subsequently overruled by the city planners, much to the chagrin, I would say, of the local foundations and universities. But our research is not just about critiquing these initiatives. Whether we like it or not, we can't go back to the past. The brewery and the steel mills are not coming back. So how can we design a better future? The first step was to try and define what inclusive innovation policy might look like in practice. And academics like to term this a fuzzy concept, which I feel is a bit of a fudge. To be truly inclusive, we think, requires addressing inclusion at 3 levels. So first of all is the more upstream level in terms of the outcomes from the investment in innovation. So it's making a contribution to the challenges that affect people's lives, for example, new therapies for dementia. And we find this is really throughout both investments, they're really ticking this box. But it's going on to the next 2 levels where I think we have the challenge for policy and practice. Secondly, in terms of distribution of benefits, do local citizens and businesses receive some direct benefit from the investment in these innovation policies and programs, such as jobs, supply chain opportunities, skills, training, and so on? And then at the 3rd level, to what extent do we involve and give ownership and agency to local communities in influencing and shaping the priorities of the innovation. So, for example, in terms of the use of buildings and spaces. So then just going on to say, talk about some of the actionable insights and findings from the research. And this was shaped by the perspective of the key stakeholders in both innovation districts. So first of all, we would recommend that at the very outset, there is a shared purpose of values and measures of success across the core partners. And it doesn't have to be a huge number of goals here, but making sure that they are embedded in everything that's done, including performance management indicators and plans and strategies so that we can monitor progress collectively. We feel that there could be more emphasis put on accelerating the animation of outreach and engagement activities with local communities. So sometimes the focus is to get the buildings up and then worry about this later. We believe there is a real need to have animation and outreach from the very beginning. Also to consider the creation of community spaces and on-site community enterprises to anchor these activities and engage with local residents. At a wider level, there's a need to make sure that these are aligned into the interventions, that these interventions are aligned with wider city and regional strategies so that we can ensure that there's support, funds leveraged, and it positions the innovation district in the wider regional ecosystem, and that helps to address issues such as scale-up. And to strengthen the links with local businesses and education providers, so schools and colleges, to promote regionally relevant research and identify skills, training, and employment opportunities. Many of these districts also involve residential quarters, so we recommend they use design principles that encourage community use with clear wayfinding, pedestrianisation, walking and cycling paths to connect the homes to other tenants and to the city at large. And then in terms of the role of the social sciences and arts and humanities in achieving a more inclusive approach. So as I said at the beginning, the STEM-focused approach has often overlooked the social and economic impacts of innovation districts. Integrating social sciences and humanities is essential to developing a more comprehensive understanding of the complex dynamics within these cities. A re-evaluation of success criteria to encompass broader indicators of community well-being and inclusivity is imperative to ensure that innovation infrastructure truly benefits both the people and the places they inhabit. The arts provides a cultural lens, humanities offer historical context, and social sciences unravel community dynamics. Interdisciplinary collaboration and participatory methods and approaches can affect the impact of these investments by fostering sustainable and inclusive development at the local level. The synergy between the arts, humanities, and social sciences in place-based innovation is further enhanced through interdisciplinary collaboration that bring together art, history, sociology, geography, politics, economics, education, and other disciplines to create a fertile ground for innovative thinking. And interdisciplinary teams also encourage diverse perspectives, foster creativity, and generate innovative solutions that encompass the multifaceted nature of local challenges. As the discourse on inclusive innovation continues to evolve, there's a growing acknowledgement of the need for more holistic and context-aware frameworks for design and delivery of innovation infrastructures. Researchers and policymakers are increasingly attuned to the importance of integrating social, cultural, and ethical considerations into these initiatives to ensure that they contribute meaningfully to societal well-being. We need to work together, all of us, to realize these outcomes. Thank you.